Well. Here we are yet again. Another beautiful day. I should have gotten this adjusted before we started. What are you going to do? Hopefully that wasn't too loud. Hello, everybody. Hopefully we're all doing okay. Let me get this up. What we're going to read today. So we're back. We're back doing it. We're back with the last part of Agro-Industrial Society and its future from our good friend Will. I should say that music you just heard, William Tyler. He's the man. I only just found out about him recently. Um, Pretty cool stuff. Pretty cool stuff. So if you like cool guitar picking, check him out. He's very cool. Him and Marissa Anderson have kind of like, I recently only just found out about them, and they've kind of been like blowing my mind about guitar stuff that you can actually do with a guitar. I don't know. They're very cool. They kind of just do their own thing, which I find very neat. It's not just kind of the same old like, you know, white guy doing like blues stuff that seems a bit weird. Should you be doing this? Should you not be? We've heard this a million times before. Anyway, Agroindustrial Society and its future. So, if you have been keeping up with the episodes, or if you are just a motivated person and you went and you read everything before we even put everything out, you'll know that part three, where we kind of arbitrarily made a break, is right here. So, this is the beginning of part three. Here we go. Where Will begins talking about Marx. What we talked about last time, well, we kind of talked about all sorts of stuff last time. I will say this time, I'm going to be skipping kind of a lot because there's a lot of stuff that I'm just not qualified to talk about. Will gets into here about like how heavy industry would operate, not just under socialism, but also like free from fossil fuels. And it's just stuff that I find fucking fascinating, but I know so little about that I would not be qualified to even begin commenting on it. So when we get to all of the stuff about, you know, wood gases, syngas, all of that stuff, I might just leave it up to you, dear listener, dear viewer, to just figure it out for yourself. But the cool thing about this is that there's just so much in it that, like, you can kind of just pick whatever you want and run with it, right? Like, I love all the food production stuff at the very beginning, all the history of the market garden stuff. I find that stuff fascinating. I find all of this stuff about Marx. I find his takes really refreshing. The labor time stuff, obviously, I'm a sicko, so I'm into that stuff. The cybernetic stuff, also the like heavy systems theory stuff, I find fascinating. Again, not really qualified to talk about that. Not really qualified to talk about any of this, honestly. I have no qualifications. I'm just an asshole. But you know, I don't know. I'll do my best. That's what I'll say. I'll do my best. I'm an asshole that will do his best. So, at the beginning here in part three, Will starts talking about how he kind of came to Marx, and it's really interesting, this paragraph here, because he talks all about how, like, you know, back in the day when he was young, he was reading guys like Michael Faraday and James Clerk Maxwell, who were, he kind of describes as these, like, rabidly fanatical scientists, as, like, you know, anything is possible if you use the entirety of human cognition and if we all work together, baby. And then when he came to Marx, Will basically just says that he saw the exact same thing in there. Obviously, Marx, famously a communist, and so it's very cool. He kind of talks about how maybe some of that stuff's lacking in science now, perhaps because of the social way that we organize around science. What are you going to do? But I just found that stuff really interesting. So I'm going to begin with this paragraph, though, because this is when we get into the stuff that we love, the labor time calculation stuff. So he says, at the time, I didn't even realize that there was any other idea about how a communist society was supposed to be established other than a labor voucher system. It's funny because we came to it, Dan and I, kind of from the reverse. I only finished the first volume of Capital like well after reading Fundamental Principles. And when I read Fundamental Principles, I was like, oh yeah, duh, like this seems right. And then I went back, kind of using hindsight, which you're not supposed to do, when I was reading Capital, and I was like, oh yeah, this all kind of, it seems to kind of flow, that this is where he'd be going, a system of like labor vouchers. And then we read the Critique of the Gotha Program, and it was like, oh yeah, okay, there you go. So he says it made perfect sense and seemed to flow directly out of his labor theory of value from the beginning of Capital. I just thought, well, of course, that's the most reasonable way to measure the value of a commodity, and we would just use that directly as the way of distributing the products of labor. One thing that's interesting, because yeah, I agree, one thing that's interesting is you get a lot of people who, maybe not a lot of people, nobody's really talking about this stuff outside of Twitter, but like, you get people on Twitter talking about how they don't like labor vouchers because it maintains the value for them, which is crazy. But it is also interesting. It's an interesting thing to think about because, like, you really don't want your sole, like, determinant of how your society functions to be upping labor productivity, right? Like, you kind of get this in your more fully automated luxury communism types where it's like, you know, uh, man, we just want everything to be so automated that you can have everything that you want in the world. And once we finally fulfill the promise of bourgeois society of capitalism, and we have 100% automated productivity, then everything will be perfect and your life will be fine, and we won't ruin the world trying to achieve that. And I don't know. I just bring that up because it's interesting because I suppose the criticism that it maintains the value form to have labor vouchers, which I don't agree with at all, but it raises an interesting point, maybe indirectly, maybe this isn't what those people are talking about, but it raises an interesting point about, like, yeah, you don't necessarily just want to be maximizing productivity at the expense of all else. Anyway, that's the last we need to talk about the value form being maintained under a system of labor vouchers, because it clearly is not. It wasn't until years later when I started talking to other Marxists that yeah, that's where we are, that I realized their entire focus was on these obscure historical disputes. I've never known any Marxists like that didn't have anything to do with what I'd been reading. Again, I don't know anybody who would do that. The whole idea of using labor time as the basis of a new economic system was conspicuously absent, and it had been replaced by ideas about the collective ownership of the means of production that were so vague they seemed to be utterly meaningless. Yeah, that's all Marxists. This is all Marxists do, is nitpick over silly debates about the Soviet Union and about debates that I'm not going to say don't matter anymore, because of course they matter, but we'll get into kind of, I think, his philosophy on socialism here and just science in general, and it's one that I find very good, which is, if you're serious about socialism and you're serious about seizing the means of production, maybe figure out what the fuck it is you do with the means of production before you start going around about being like, we need to start seizing everything. And also, like, maybe figure out an economic unit of account that isn't just like, give it to the bureaucrats, they'll solve it. Smacks of socialism from above, if you ask me. Any specific ideas about how this was to be implemented was considered to be impossible to determine in advance, because apparently Marx just forgot to elaborate on it, and we were all just supposed to figure it out at a moment's notice once society had collapsed to a point where revolution was achievable, because it all had to be compatible with the material conditions at the time, and anything else was just strictly utopian. That's an extraordinarily destructive idea that's taken hold in this community to place arbitrary limits on our understanding without any investigation in direct contradiction to the authority you are appealing to on the matter, and somehow these are going to be the guiding light that shall lead humanity to its freedom from tyranny. This is just like, it's political economy, you know what I mean? And I think socialists now, just because and when I say socialists, I mean like everybody left of like a SOCDEM. I mean like communists and socialists and anarchists, right? Like, we all kind of just look at society and we see so little of the kind of political organization that existed on like a global scale during the heyday of the socialist movement, right? That like we just pine for that and we just wish that we had that, and everything else is kind of an afterthought. But in reality, like, if we're serious about making a communist society, we need to be thinking about the political organization of it. But Jesus fucking Christ, we also need to be figuring out a better way to run an economy than obviously capitalism, but then also obviously just like centrally plan it all. I was speaking a couple of months ago to this dude from SA out here, Socialist Appeal, and he's just like, I was like, so what is it that you guys like, what's your plan once you take power? And he was just like, well, we adhere to a strict, I think it was Socialist Appeal, he was like, we would adhere to a strict idea of a centrally planned economy. And I was just like, what are you talking about? And he was just like, we would centrally plan the economy. And I was like, good point. Yeah. I would like to know what that actually means. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, blah, 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 blah. These people make liberals seem reasonable. Womp, womp. What has happened to my movement, etc., 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 is meticulously detailed and compelling organization of the origins of the fundamental problems of our society. But, at the end of the day, like, I forget which part he says this, like, Marxists and, just in, like, broader kind of, like, people who have, their social movements have grown from a kind of Marxist thought, like, the reason that, like, I would still consider myself a Marxist, or at least, like, Marx adjacent, is because, Marxists maybe are, like, some of the few people who have, like, the social relations thing figured out, right? Everybody else is either a liberal and is just like, class? What class? Class doesn't exist. or, you know, has some insane right-wing view of like big government or some bullshit like that. Like, the reason that I think that socialists are so important in this whole like changing the world thing is because, you know, we figured out what drives the fundamental cycle of accumulation that is ruining everything for just about everybody. And it has to do with the way that we socially relate to each other. I'll just say that. How about that? Um, Starting here again. There are things we are able to know about the productive forces themselves that are relevant to the implementation of socialism. This is the good stuff. We don't just need to stop. We don't need to stop at theories of how social relations might be changed so that they can be used for the benefit of everyone. I'd like to, as best as I know how, describe the structure I see in the productive forces, how I think this structure can be described mathematically, and how the relevant information needed to use this mathematical structure to help guide production on a societal level can be derived from the activity of production. So this is where the labor time stuff comes into it, right? Um, this project is like way too big for like any one person to do the project of like changing the world, right? Obviously, duh. But like you need to have a coherent theory of social relations, right? That's first. You need to have a coherent theory about how your like economic structure would work to make life, you know, equitable and not have the value form fucking return. You need to have things figured out so that things would be distributed correctly. Obviously, like post-production changes and stuff like that. But you also need to understand how the fuck like everything's going to work, because it isn't really enough to just say, okay, we've got the economic thing sorted out. We got labor time calculation, right? We got labor vouchers. It's going to be easy, right? Because obviously you need more than the councils, but you also need to understand like, okay, well, how are we going to grow food without fucking destroying everything? How are we going to, you know, how on earth are we going to maintain heavy industry without using fossil fuels? Like, pretty massive questions. And yeah, all of the Marxists fixes, for as good as some of them are, I'm thinking here of like the group of international communists, like, you know, solutions, the economic solutions at least. Um, None of them really seem to take into account the productive forces and the actual like science behind all of that stuff seriously at all. Partially because it just takes too much fucking time. It's like, God damn it, how are you supposed to do that? How the hell are you supposed to research how we're supposed to produce steel without using fossil fuels? How the hell are you supposed to redesign steel furnaces? You know what I mean? We'll get to that because Will kind of talks about that. But yeah, it's a fucking massive project. Political economy, it's political economy, and it's also just like fucking just like science. Jesus, it's a big project. You know, who would have thought? I guess that's the reason why Marx was like a polymath, fucking like, well, not polymath, but like a sicko who was interested in like chemistry and agriculture and all of this crazy stuff. Because you kind of need to be to really understand not just where we are, but how things might change and what they would look like after a big change. Big change. Some might call that a revolution. So, where were we? I'll start here. I'll try to explain a bit about how food systems relate to this whole network and why they, along with agricultural systems generally, play such a central role in society. I also want to touch on the sustainability of technology, what it means for an economic system without fossil fuel consumption, etc., etc., etc. And then he gets into here talking a bit about capital. So he says capital is a special category of commodities, not just because it can produce other commodities when combined with labor, it can produce itself. One second, let's get rid of this. I'm getting a phone call. My phone calls have started coming up on my computer. I don't really understand why that is happening. Hang on, let me just do that. All right, I sound like a grandpa. God, hang on. Let me just sort this out. What's going on here? The other line. Okay, that should be that. That should be no more interruptions. Although I say that, there almost certainly will be. I want to cut away the fat, so we're going to be... Actually, let's start here. Somewhere within that complex of capital, there's a self-replicating machine that, when acted upon by labor, can make an exact copy of itself. I want to cut away the fat from the whole system and find the beating heart of this monstrosity, understand its internal anatomy and the mechanisms that allow it to physically reproduce itself. I think the best way of doing that is by focusing in on the means of subsistence and the processes involved in their production, because that's where this branch of the machine that facilitates the reproduction of labor power, which is essential to the operation of the thing. A large portion of that is the food system, along with housing, domestic goods of those houses, and textiles occupying a significant portion of that subset, with in terms of variety and type of complexity. So throughout this, like a lot of those final couple of things get discussed. And I would say if you are interested in any one of those things about like food system, obviously that's like kind of part one of what we did. Housing as well, that gets talked about in what we called part two, which is very interesting. So go find it there. Anarcho-monarchist Luddite, hell yeah. Hell yeah, that's an excellent name. I like that. I'm all about that. Domestic goods in those houses, right? So like consumer products. That doesn't get talked about too much in this essay, so I don't know, do your own fucking research. As well as textiles. Again, do your own fucking research. So here, the idea of why a food system is important is because it attempts to go beyond agriculture proper and include in its analysis the entire chain of processes involved in the food supply, the primary production of organisms in the agricultural systems, the infrastructure required to accomplish this, and to initially store and move this food all around, all of the food processing systems that transform the raw materials of food into the ingredients of cookery, and finally, the entire process of then making these into prepared meals. So this is kind of like, this is the big overarching point of this essay, right? It's like, listen, if we want to actually like continue to reproduce ourselves, if we want to continue to autopoiesicize ourselves, we got to be thinking about, you know, food production because we need to eat food. But the bigger point to all of this is like, it isn't just food production, it's a food system. And you got to be thinking about systems when you're talking about anything, because specifically when it comes to food production, obviously you need like the fertilizers, the inputs, the seeds, all of that to grow your food. But you also need like to massively overhaul world transportation systems. You need to overhaul how we produce tools. You need to remake things so that they don't just fucking fall apart and then need to buy a whole nother one. Like we need to remake everything from like combine harvesters to fucking like, you know, I don't know, pliers to make things that they last. And this requires overhauling all industry, basically, which is, it's fucking easy. You know, I could do that. As well as, again, textiles, domestic goods, make sure that, you know, people just chill. Stalin with the CNT FII stuff done, too. Yeah, as he would have loved. All right, so yeah, we're just talking agro-industrial society and its future. Hopefully all of you have read this, or at least listened to my weaselly voice read it out loud, because it fucking rocks. This is really, really good stuff. And again, the main point behind all of this stuff, be thinking in systems. Be thinking in systems, and also, if you're a Marxist, be thinking about the actual means of production, what they mean and how we can organize them, how can we actually understand them. It's almost like Marxism is kind of a science, and you got to like take a lot of this stuff seriously about, you know, chemical processes and stuff like that. So when we're talking about systems, he says this concept is then often extended to so-called agri-food systems that add onto this complex all of the non-food outputs of agricultural systems. So this is stuff like textiles, fiber, and all of stuff like that. Wool, I would imagine, as well. Don't know really anything about raising livestock, so I know wool comes from sheep. That's what I know. Within this broad view, there is how these systems operate in the world now, how these systems have operated in the past, and then combining these together, you get the range of historical stuff that you can draw on. Makes sense. I mean, when we talked about lay systems, I think it was like last episode about like how can we actually mass produce grain on a scale, and in a way, on a scale where we can actually feed everybody, and also in a way that isn't just going to fucking like continue to erode our soil like we're doing now when we grow, you know, wheat or corn or oats or rice, things like that. Like, how can we actually produce these well? Because if you listen to permaculture people or people on the left who just go, I don't know, permaculture, they'll tell you, you need to stop doing all of this. But if you stop doing all of that, everybody dies. So, you know, how can we do that without everybody dying, I suppose? Or how can we continue to produce without killing the soil? Because we don't want anything to die. We don't want people to die or the soil to die. Within this, oh yeah, so we already did that. But anyway, the reason I brought up lay systems is because you don't really see lay systems anymore. Lay systems are like, to really simplify it, you know, if you look at like 3 field crop rotations from like back in the day in the feudal systems, like the picture in the mind's eye of 3 field rotations where you like produced your wheat and all of the stuff that you actually eat on one field. Then the next season you rotate that out into something like, you know, a mixture of like grasses and nitrogen fixing things like, I don't know, beans or some bullshit, legumes of some kind. And then after that, you kind of turn that into pasture land for all of your cows to eat everything that's on that. The cows take dumps. You till the soil again. You have all of this lovely manure and all of this really good stuff. And then after that, you plant your wheat again. That's kind of like what a simplified lay system is. And, you know, you don't see that used anymore. But realistically, if we want to continue to produce wheat and not destroy our ecosystems, we're going to need to use something like that, right? So when he talks about, you know, the range of historically developed systems that we can draw upon, looking to the past, actually, you know, I don't want to be like some schmuck, but like there's some good ideas out there in the past. Um, but obviously, we're going to need to be adapting them to modern day because, yeah, duh, we're not peasants. Although some of us would like to be. This is a useful way of thinking about the physical structure of capital from a systems theory perspective because it identifies the areas of production that rely on the biological processes, what technical systems exist to facilitate these processes, and then transform organisms into products. What these products are, what the organisms are that we're relying on to do these things, and the physiological requirements they have, right? So think about all the little microorganisms in the goddamn soil. Um, Systems that don't have organisms as their input or output are fundamentally more complex. Oh, I'm sorry. Systems that have organisms as their input or output are obviously fundamentally more complex than those that don't because they're really unpredictable. Things might be going fine, then all of a sudden everything dies and you just lose a shit ton of labor because, you know, your fucking 10 acres of wheat just up and died on you. I don't know why that would happen, but maybe it just would. He talks about how food is very ephemeral and all of the qualities that you need to have it, right? It's like you might spend a couple of months growing a whole bunch of spinach so that everybody can have a bunch of spinach. But if you harvest it and then leave it in the sun, it's just fucked. And, you know, because it's incredibly weak, you need to really be looking after all of this stuff. So food systems, complicated to sort out from a logistics perspective. And that's kind of why he's saying you need to be looking at these things from a, at the very least, systems theory perspective, but maybe even a cybernetics perspective. Although the scope about what's being considered is vast and the complexity of this network of processes is extremely high, you know what I love? I love dirt bikes without mufflers. I think they're really cool. And I love living on an intersection where they just drive by all the time. It's excellent. There's nothing about these things that are fundamentally beyond our ability to understand, even if our understanding will always be in some ways incomplete. Black box it. I love just saying black box it. If I don't understand something, I just go, I'm black boxing it. I don't need to understand. Something go in, something else come out. That's all I need to know. It's important to develop this understanding, particularly if we're going to try to bring into being a new economic system for society. Look at that. All economic activity is made possible by the agri-food system, precisely because this is the area of economic activity that is most directly generating the means of subsistence. Basically, this is what allows us to continue to reproduce ourselves, and it's what allows us to reproduce our own labor power, which is important. It's basically what allows us to do the rest of everything else. I mean, there's a reason that, you know, once we figured out agriculture, that a bunch of schmucks, you know, started sitting out and, you know, working on math or whatever because they didn't have to work, right? Like, this stuff's important. And so we need to do it properly and we need to do it correctly because quicker and quicker, more quickly and more quickly, our ability to do it is dwindling away. And it's not that capitalism has really ever fundamentally been able to provide people enough food ever to begin with, but now it's getting worse. It's getting much worse. And, you know, but the fuck did they just say that we're going to get 1.5 degrees of warming by like 2027? Like, holy fucking shit, this stuff's going to sneak up on us so fast. Not even thinking about soil erosion. Like, yeah, okay. I don't need to become a doomer too quickly into the stream, but like, yeah, we need to figure this stuff out. Probably need to figure it out quickly as well. So yeah, basically it talks about how the agri-food system is an abstract collection of technical systems, and it encompasses all ways of physically organizing society to produce all of these things. Seems fairly straightforward. For any given agri-food system, there is an associated set of mechanical objects, building materials, electrical systems, synthetic chemicals, etc., that are the outputs of an associated industrial system. So again, we got to be thinking in systems, because if we're just thinking about food production as growing broad beans, which is what I think about it as, you're going to miss out on everything else. You need to rehole everything, basically. And I think, and you know, the labor time accounting stuff would make this much more simple to do. I mean, it would make it doable, right? Like, it would make it possible to begin with. But if you don't have like a blueprint for what these new systems are going to look like, and when we say new systems, buddy, it isn't just fucking agriculture. It's agriculture, but it's, again, all of heavy industry as well. Yo, there they go again. That's so cool. I love that. I love it when they do that. That's so fucking sick. I was actually just saying recently, I've been considering moving back home, and I was like, fuck, if I move back home, like to America, I was like, I won't have the money to get a car. Maybe I just get like a fucking license for like a moped and just use that. That'd be fucking sick, dude. And then these schmucks drive by and I'm like, okay, fuck that. That's extremely lame. Together, these represent a sort of minimally complex economic system that you would need, basically. Yeah, this represents a minimally complex economic system, the smallest thing, the smallest scale that you could have an economy be to continue human life, basically. And so he's basically saying it's large types of heavy industry and it's the agri-food system, which you kind of need to think of as one very complicated system, I suppose, at times. If you just want to abstract away and think about it like that, 'cause you can't have one without the other, right? It would be extremely inefficient even if you rehold the entirety of human agricultural production. It would be extremely inefficient to have like this awesomely sustainable, great agricultural system with the logistics, transportation, and heavy industry that we have now. It would just, so you got to rehold everything. And when we say transportation, we'll get into that in a bit, but like you can't just have fucking 16 wheelers transporting everything. You know what I mean? Rail, electric rail. That's the future. Invest in electric rail. I don't know. This minimal economic system is also deriving the energy it consumes from somewhere, and the source of this energy used influences the specific technical systems that can be used. Okay, so this is where I'm going to kind of take a step back, put my hands up, and be like, I don't know anything about any of this. He gets into here talking about different types of energy production, different solutions for like a post-fossil fuel, or at least like a transition phase, of energy production without using natural gas, without using coal, without using oil. What is it that we can actually use? And one of the things that he talks about here is what he calls syngas, which I believe someone named like George Olah came up with. Where are they? Yeah. One system that seems especially promising to me is George Olah's proposal of a methanol economy, where wood or other biomass would be gasified and converted into synthesis gas or syngas, which is a mixture of hydrogen, carbon monoxide, and CO2, which is now mostly made with natural gas and coal. Again, I don't really know a whole lot about this stuff. I don't know how feasible this would be, but it's a solution that he's putting forward, which obviously still has its flaws. George Olah, I think, was like a respected chemist from like Hungary or something like that. So go look up what he's talking about here. It seems really interesting. The problem with it, though, there's problems with all fucking types of energy production. The problem with this one, though, is that you have to have large amounts of biomass to burn. So you'd basically need to be growing forests to then cut them down to then use in energy production, which is like infinitely better than what we have now, but still would be really not really harmful. It would be fucking harmful to the ecosystem, I'll say that. But again, I just don't know enough about this to really comment on it one way or another. I found all this stuff fascinating, and I'd suggest everybody go read it. Nuclear power doesn't get bought up in here. Again, I'll put my hands up. I don't really know enough about that shit. I know that like anti-nuclear power people have kind of fucked everything up in Germany for the time being, but I also know that like nuclear power isn't as good as like nuclear power chuds like to say it is, because it still produces waste and you still have to mine all of this shit. It seems like it would be better to just use trees, even if you're fucking burning them and growing them, to just burn them. But again, I don't know. I don't know how much uranium is actually used in nuclear power. I don't know how much better it could be. I got no idea. I know everybody likes to pretend that they know, but I'll just put my hands up and say, I got no fucking idea. So we're going to go ahead and skip some of this. One thing I will say, though, is that he says there's a paper here that I've been meaning to read. The 2022 paper on the history and future of 100% renewable energy systems research by C. Breyer et al. Somebody get on that. Somebody read that and report back, because I got no fucking time these days. But I will get around to reading this. Seems interesting, at least. 100% renewable energy production? Sign me up. I had an environmental science teacher a long time ago in high school. He used to say something like, the best form of energy production is just like, cutting demand. It's just like a huge slash of demand of energy, right? And you can see how we could do this easily with a lot of different things, like more sustainable, or more, what's the fucking word? More better public transportation. So everybody isn't just using their own fucking cars to go like 5 blocks. All sorts of stuff. We could cut energy needs a lot by just having good infrastructure. But again, you still need to produce energy somehow, and I don't know. Go read this stuff, though, because it is really fascinating. Syngas, it's not really something I'd heard of. I had heard something about using biomass to to form into a synthesis gas that can then be burned. But again, I don't know. It seems great, though. I do need to do more research into this stuff. Again, it's funny. Dan and I, for the show this week, so on Friday, We're reading this. Where is it? Printed it out because I'm an asshole. Party Organization in Lenin's Comintern. I don't know if you can actually read that, but it's by a guy named John Riddell. It's a couple essays by him, and it's all about basically like, how did Lenin organize his party? What is democratic centralism? Is democratic centralism good? The guy's a trot, so he's like, yeah, it's good. But I don't know. I thought I was really gonna. When we went to read, I was like, I don't fucking care about this. This is just gonna be a pain in the ass to read. Who gives a fuck? This seems very outdated. I'm totally come around because it is actually a really fascinating set of essays. But at the end of the day, like, I'm beginning to think more and more like maybe as socialists we should actually be reading more stuff about the productive forces and about how this shit actually works, because that does seem just as important as what's the correct take on democratic centralism. Although this Friday, tune in, the correct take on democratic centralism. We're coming off our Paul Maddock reading again, so we probably won't be too generous, but I don't know, what are you gonna do? Who gives a fuck? Democratic centralism, whatever, dude. It would be nice if it worked. How about that? That's my take on it for now, at least until I finish this essay. Democratic centralism, it would be nice if it worked. I'm glad that somehow, I mean, I say somehow, I'm glad that somehow it seems like we've slowly started to develop like more of like an ultra left audience. For like the like handful of people that actually listen to the show, a lot of you seem incredibly cool and seem like more of your kind of like leftcom types, which I think is very cool. I'm glad we've done that because fucking for a lot of the other shit, I just don't have time for it, honestly. Just a lot of the like. But my specific brand of democratic centralism actually has not been tried yet. Yes. Perhaps there are whole branches of science dedicated to actual organizing systems. Maybe we could draw upon those instead of just democratic centralism. It's so funny because the guy in the essay, I'll get back to this in a second, but the guy in the essay is so like, he's trying so hard to make it seem like this is the good way to do things. But it's so funny because he's always like, and yeah, sure, at this time period, it tended to swing back to being a bit more centralized than democratic, but, that's just what the times called for. And it's like, did it? Wow, who could have fucking seen that coming? Okay, back to this. I think we do know enough about the kinds of systems that can operate without fossil fuel to say that it is at least conceptually possible to have a food system with significant industrial inputs that is sustainable overall, even if a lot of the specific details about such a system are unclear. I'm black boxing it, baby. I don't know. Sure, it seems possible. Some kind of asshole convention going on today. Good lord. Based on a proposal for alternative industrial system like what I've described, which again, go read it for yourself, you can map out all of the components that constitute a system as a flowchart and then describe how these components are interacting with each other, and in this way describe the overall structure of such a system, at least on a sort of abstract level. Okay, so I'm going to skip this bit as well, but it's really important because here's where he gets into talking all about like graph theory and more systems theory stuff about like how you would actually map out an economy, basically, like society, in order to be able to plan it in some way. And, we're not going to get into here about, like, how would this be planned? How much say do the councils have? What is it, a democratic republic? Is it just a system of councils? Whatever. We're not getting into that now. But he's basically saying that if in any way you want to have anything like a planned economy, even if it's fucking democratically centralized, or if it's just like, I don't know, some like wacko, like completely autonomous thing where everybody just has the councils, dude. You need to basically be thinking about how you can map all of this stuff out. And he describes it really well here. That bit that I just read when I read it the first time where it was like, you can have a flow chart. I was like, yeah, okay, it seems like you could have a flow chart. But then he gets into like this paragraph here. He talks about how you can graph all of this stuff out. And I don't fucking know anything about graph theory, but this stuff is blowing my mind. He basically talks about how, you have two kind of it's basically input-output tables, kind of, but for more of like a systems theory kind of thing. It's like you have kind of two reflecting axes, and then you kind of like have, a binary thing. It's where it's like 1 if these things interact, or a 0 if they don't interact. And in that way, you're kind of able to see like, okay, steel production, this interacts with like railroad tracks or some bullshit. Railroad tracks does not interact with the shoelace factory, you know what I mean? Or like the rivet factory or something like that. It's really fascinating. And it seems, when you begin reading about this stuff, like up here, it kind of seems like, yeah, okay, that's like obvious and intuitive, but then you kind of get into it and you're like, oh, okay, graph theory. Oh, yes, Kantorovich and Leontiev. Okay, so again, I'm going to skip that bit. Go read it. You systems theory sickos. You'll love all of this stuff. And then he kind of starts doing this. what's it called? Like a what are those things called? Like thought experiments. I said mind experiments, mind palaces. Like a thought experiment about kind of the ways in which you need to think about how you're organizing all of this stuff and what you need to be considering and how you create like self-replicating systems, et cetera, et cetera. Again, go read that for yourself. Um, let's see here. Okay, we'll go back here. In the labor time accounting system Marx describes, commodity exchange is replaced by distribution according to labor time contributed, concrete labor, and all of the deductions have taken place that allow such a system to make sense. Makes sense. The socially necessary labor time required to produce a product establishes a standard unit of account so that labor time contributed by an individual to society can then be taken back in roughly equal measure as individual consumption. We know all about this. This is good stuff. This is the way in which you kind of like actually meld socially necessary labor time with your concrete labor in a way that makes sense. It does not make sense under capitalism because there's this crazy exchange. I'm not going to say it's an unequal exchange because it would still be an unequal exchange under socialism because you got to look after people. We've talked about all of this, blah, 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 blah. All good stuff. We love all of this stuff. We're back into it. This is a nice feature because individual consumption is regulated in such a way that no one's taking from the stock of social products more in terms of labor time required than they are providing to the system. Good. Again, this is why you need a unit of account, right? Maybe eventually you like, I don't know, could just like take whatever the fuck you want, but you would still need to be accounting for this stuff. And concrete labor, measuring concrete labor and comparing it to socially necessary labor time is a very good way to do it. Withdrawals of products from the stock of social products give us a way of determining local and system-wide consumption rates that should inform the requirements of the social productive processes. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and underline that because that is very important. By underline, I mean highlight. I'm going to read it again. Withdrawals of products from the stock of social products give us a way of determining local and system-wide consumption rates that should inform the requirements of social productive processes. So when we're talking about how you plan an economy, basically every liberal schmuck on the planet will tell you it can't be done. There's just too much information. The only way you can do it is through fucking money and through markets. Wrong. You're wrong. Fucking Amazon and like, I'm just looking at this shit objectively. It shows you how easy it is to predict what people need. You just need information, right? Which sounds like spooky and Big Brother or whatever because of the way Amazon does it, which is fucking jank. There's like that story in People's Republic of Walmart about how they talk about, I think it was like Target was able to predict, they were able to like send women maternity clothes advertisements before these women knew that they were pregnant. And they'd be like, why am I getting these? And they'd be like, because we have all the information. We don't want it to be like spooky like that. But one thing that I've been speaking about with Will is kind of food consumption and cooking and the way in which you get food to people. And because I'm an asshole Marxist from California, whose one of his favorite books is The Dispossessed, I'm always like, hey, why don't we just have cafeterias? You know what I mean? I think cafeterias are awesome. You make big fucking batches of the best, most healthiest food you could want. You have everything you could ever want. You got a soft serve machine. This is just the food I would want. You got pizza. You got better food than that. But, and everybody's able to just come and they're able to just take whatever the fuck they want and you write it off with like the GSU or whatever, right? GSU? The communist tax or whatever. But Will made a really good point where he was like, actually, you would probably want, from a planning perspective, people to be cooking individually a little bit more. Like, you would still want cafeterias because you'd still want, like, people who, like, aren't able to work or whatever, just can't be fucking bothered to cook. You'd still want them to go and eat, and you could probably have that stuff for free. That would be fine. But you'd actually kind of want people to be cooking because then you're getting more information and more data that you can use in planning, right? You can go, okay, Jack eats a lot of, like, broad beans and garlic scapes. So, send 5 pounds per day broad beans to where Jack lives so that he can, have his fix because we can predict that that's what he's going to want. And, like Paracon people fucking bend themselves over backwards trying to figure out how are we supposed to predict these things. And I kind of love it. I'd like to read some Paragon stuff for the show because I love just like the subjective ranking system. I'm probably botching a lot of this because, again, I haven't engaged with it too much. But just like the idea of people ranking, what they want. While it might have a place somewhere, I just think it's so funny. It's like, you can probably just predict these things. Like, Amazon and Walmart show you that you can. And it literally, like, the algorithm is sometimes as simple as, you bought this, you might like this. And we're like, whoa, they can predict the future. They're predicting when people are getting pregnant. You know what I mean? It's very funny. But it is just an extremely simple thing to do. And so, yeah, that's what we're talking about here. I don't know. I love that stuff. I think that's so fascinating. So anyway, starting from there, it doesn't seem like it would be too hard to just design the logistics systems to adjust production and the transport of products to local warehouses in response to these signals. It is often insisted that this is not a market. I find this really interesting, and this is a way of thinking about the group of international communist stuff that I hadn't thought about before. He's saying that people often insist that that's not a market, but it sure seems an awful lot like a market, though it's a very weird market structure. Maybe there is some subtle definitional difference that I'm not appreciating, like that a market explicitly refers to commodity exchange. But I don't have any real problem with seeing this as some sort of market socialist system. It has market-like elements, at least with some degree of self-regulation, and operates in a way analogous to a market system with price signals that can continuously adjust supply and demand, but overcome the negative aspects of production for profit. I mean, yeah, I like one thing that doesn't get discussed a whole lot in here is like arbitrage, right? Of like different things costing different prices, like apples costing way less in one locality than in another locality. And that's kind of what you want to avoid when you're trying to get, that's what like you want to get past markets, right? Because, you know, you wouldn't want like, I don't know. Arbitrage is just kind of not very good. I guess I just kind of have like a knee-jerk reaction to it just because like you wouldn't want a bunch of people moving to one place and then completely abandoning another place because, you know, everything's very cheap and then everything would change and everyone's like, why the fuck are we here now? But I don't know, maybe a certain amount of that is inevitable. It certainly seems like it would be with food production because there's just no way of maintaining, unless you had like a global communist tax kind of thing for when your shipment of cantaloupes rots or the rails get destroyed here, or just by virtue of you living further away from where a thing grows, right? It seems like there is going to be a certain amount of arbitrage there, but like, I don't know. Markets, I got a knee-jerk reaction to them, but if a market is just like a democratic labor voucher system, I guess that's fine. But again, I do think we really want to be getting past kind of arbitrage in general, but maybe you just can't, at least with food. Maybe you just fucking can't. Like transportation throws such a monkey wrench into things that yeah, I don't know, whatever. I've spent all day, not all day, I spent like an hour right before this at the allotment, and I was picking broad beans and kind of trimming all of the scapes off of my garlic, because we're at that point, which is, fuck, I love that point of the year. But now, fuck me, I just smell like garlic. Yeah, good thing you can't smell me through the screen, because you'd just be smelling garlic. I'm going to make a big fucking stir fry after this with beans and garlic scapes. Okay, now this is what you sickos really want to know. This is the paragraph that you sickos are all about. I know you people. You all want to know what Kleiman says about the Gotha program. What does Kleiman say about this? What is that new value theory book that's out that I fucking can't give less of a fuck about, but I know that I'm going to actually read because I'm a sicko for the value theory stuff. We're going to talk some value theory here, okay? Kinda. Not really. We're going to talk about the critique of the Gotha program, but again, all of you sickos will love this. So, he says, now, there's a passage in the critique of the Gotha program. That's how you know what's about to come is going to be good. You're either going to get the worst take of all time or someone who's actually read the critique of the Gotha program. It's almost always the former. Just after the part where Marx is describing the system that says, okay, here's the controversial bit. In spite of this advance, this equal right is still constantly encumbered by a bourgeois limitation. You telling me there's bourgeois limit? You telling me that in a transition from one mode of production to another, that there are certain elements of the last mode of production that can coexist at the same time as another mode of production? That doesn't sound like the simple teleology that my Marx talks about. It's almost like it's, I'm not going to say it. It's almost like it's dialectical. What's this bourgeois limitation? The right of producers is proportional to the labor that they supply. Boo. The equality consists in the fact that measurement is made with equal standard labor. So everybody's getting measured the same way, but what we're about to see is that that's going to create some inequality. But one man is superior to another physically or mentally, and so supplies more labor in the same time, or can work for a longer time. And labor, to serve as a measure, must be defined by its duration or intensity. Otherwise, it ceases to be a standard of measurement. This equal right is an unequal right for unequal labor. So what Marx is okay, well, fuck. I'll say what Kleiman says, and then we'll finish this paragraph, and then we'll get into it. Kleiman and a lot of other people I've read interpret this to mean that in Marx's system, individual remuneration will be based on the labor hours contributed, as well as their individual intensity. What the fuck? I know what it means, but like, what the fuck? Intensity of labor. I had always interpreted this passage to mean that the system is not primarily trying to enforce absolute equality in society, that Marx accepts that in lower stage communism there will be still social inequality simply because people's abilities and needs are unequal. If Marx is suggesting what Kleiman is saying, then I think we can safely say, fuck trying to objectively measure on every individual's intensity of labor, because that seems fucking impossible. Okay, I come down on Will's side with this. I think what Kleiman is saying might be possible. Kleiman is saying uh, you just got to measure everything really well and then it will be equal, right? I think. I mean, like, I understand what is meant by, like, more advanced labor or whatever, or more like, labor of a higher intensity, right? But, like, what the fuck? How could you possibly measure that in a way that would lead to, like, any kind of sense, but also like social stability? Because, like, I wouldn't be cool with a communist society where everybody's equal, dude, and everyone's fine, except the asshole that works in the office up the hill. He gets 2 times the labor hours that you do because he's really smart and he's working. Like, I don't know. I'm sorry. That's just going to lead to another class dynamic that you really don't want. And I could see maybe in a transitional phase doing that, maybe just so you don't get Cuba'd and like all of the like skilled professionals fuck off. But, like, I think you have to avoid that at all costs, trying to measure intensity of labor, because it is what Will is saying. It's fucking impossible, but also just like, I think it's shitty. And honestly, this is like, when I try to explain to like my normie friends, when I try to explain to my normie friends, like, the fundamental principle stuff, labor time accounting and all of that, this is the thing that they get caught up on, right? I was trying to explain it to this Austrian guy the other day, a guy that I work with. He's so funny because I was reading the book and he was like, what is this? This is some very radical stuff. Yeah, this is very, oh, wow, this is some very radical stuff. See, communist production. Whoa. And he like wanted me to explain it to him. So I was just like, fuck me. I got to start like putting different book covers, like book jackets on the books that I'm reading or whatever. No, I'm just reading Harry Potter. And I'm reading like subversive communist bullshit. But it was funny because he was like fully on board with everything. But then he was like, but so you are telling me that the person picking the broad beans would be getting paid the same thing as the brain surgeon? For whatever reason, everybody fucking goes to the brain surgeon. And it's like, yeah, I would think that. If you just own it, people are just like, oh, okay, yes, that makes sense. Because it's just like, I don't know, dude. You can't. We get up in the morning, everybody is doing the same thing. Everybody's contributing to society so that it can continue to function under capitalism. We all know that you can't fucking get up and realize that because everybody's in competition and you're getting exploited out the ass, right? But, like, under a socialist system, yeah, you get it. Everybody's getting up and doing the same thing. And, like, I'm sorry, if the only reason that you're a brain surgeon is because you want to have, like, 2 communist TVs, like, fuck off. I'm sorry. Like, I think that this might require a large shift in ideology for everybody to be cool with, but that comes along with the base, baby. I'm just going to be really crude, and that comes along, change the base, everything will fucking follow. Again, this is why I maybe say you might need to do it in a transitional phase, but, like, red flags, avoid it at all cost. I think don't try to measure people's intensity of labor, because I think it's dumb. That's why I think it's fucking dumb. Interested to think what you all would say on that, though, because, again, I know that this is kind of a split, even with commies, right? I mean, yeah, Kleiman and Will, they disagree, so, yeah, but I don't know. It's impossible, and I think it just gets way too convoluted if you try to be like, well, okay, but what about the guy doing the logistics for, collecting garbage cans? He seems like he's got a big intensity of labor. It's like, no, that's fucking stupid. Pay that schmuck the same as the people collecting the garbage. It will be fine. And especially if everybody can have, like, good living standards. I don't know. This shit's all going to be decided for us at the end of the day because it's going to fucking happen with the collapse of climate change. What are you going to do? Hopefully it doesn't. What I mean by that is that we're just not going to be able to continue to produce. Like, I have an Apple Watch and an iPhone and an iPad and 2 laptops and a desktop and 5 TVs. Like, yeah, you're just not going to be able to have that. So this will be solved for us by, just not being able to produce what these sicko perverts would want with their, like, 6 times multiplier on their labor hours or whatever. Anyway, The Fundamental Principles of Communist Production and Distribution is a very interesting text, but it's light on the details about how this system labor time accounting gets tied in with a comprehensive system of economic planning. Dan and I talked about this in the show. Yeah, 100%. But again, it is the fundamental principles of, well, yeah, it's the book that explains the fundamental economic unit that you're using. That's how I think about it. If you try to go with their political thinking, it's just going to be one big council, man. One big council, dude. It reports to a middle-sized council, and which is reported to by a small council. I don't know. That makes no sense. It would be cool, but that makes no sense. This is not exactly a fault of the text, but there are a lot of ways in which a system like that can be planned that would work. It succeeds, I think, in doing what it sets out to do. It very clearly and systematically explains the system Marx was putting forward, but how socialist mode of production would work, blah, 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 blah. And it fleshes out the conception. Well, okay, whatever. We're just going to skip the rest of that paragraph going to here. The basic organizational structure that they put forward, to the extent that they even provide this, is compelling and an interesting way to go about things. Their structure of guilds or productive associations is reminiscent of some of the syndicalist conceptions of organized production, but without the rather convoluted underlying economic system that you usually find in that tradition. I love the syndicalist stuff. It's so funny, dude. It's just like, I don't know. It's like, oh man, they're so close to getting it. They're so close to getting it. But then it's just like, okay, we have like these worker-run syndicates or whatever. It's like, how do they relate to each other? Like without a state? And they're like, oh, well, here's the thing. They organize through a complex body of inter-syndicate relationships. And you kind of go, wait a minute, this just sounds like a state. What are you talking about? Anyway, love syndicalists, though. I think they're very cool. And again, I'm not someone that really likes to call myself anything. I think it's kind of silly to call yourself one thing or another, unless you're an anarcho-monarchist Luddite, which is incredibly cool. But, you know, I don't know. Worse things to call yourself than a fucking syndicalist, right? Not going to get into what those things are, but we discussed some of them earlier on here when we were discussing democratic centralism, maybe. Okay, what's he talking about? So they say that behind all of this, you have a system of economic planning, but I'm still not exactly clear on kind of what that is. How can the rates consumer goods are being withdrawn from the system in each locality gets responded to by the productive system and coordinated, if this is done in planning periods or if it's being continuously adjusted. They kind of just fall back on the producer and consumer associations will decide by communicating with one another. Yeah, okay. That basically is what the book says. This is why you need to actually have a thought out theory of systems theory, and you know, you need to have kind of like more like there need to be people who are just actively involved in kind of just planning and sorting all this stuff out. But I don't think it's as complicated as we need. In the earlier stuff, this is kind of why Will spends that large part talking about how you would create like a geospatial mapping software, right? Because once you do that, once you have everything locked and rooted in space and time, it's much easier to plan things. You can kind of just do it more or less automatically, and you just go, hey, we need more beans over here, buddy. The most based ideology. Indeed, the most based. We'll do some reading about that on the show next. Be like, what is this? This system would be a lot easier for products that are truly reproducible and don't rapidly deteriorate, basically, you know, unlike food. How the labor system required for transport is accounted seems complicated. It could either be added onto the labor required for product in aggregate or accounted for with the communist tax for infrastructure. You could also have regional variations in the cost of products that reflect local differences. Again, this is kind of getting to the kind of like transportation arbitrage stuff. You know, what are you going to do? This stuff is really interesting. The final food transportation cost, once the product has left the productive facility, is really what needs to be addressed. All of the other transportation costs can be adequately incorporated directly into the labor time accounting system that is suggested in the text, though this never actually seems to be directly addressed. Yeah, transportation is an interesting thing, because I could see people being like, all transportation costs, just put it on the communist tax. But then I could also see people being like, tag it on directly to the price of a product. But then again, if you do that, then you get kind of price arbitrage. I kind of think that that's maybe fine. But again, I don't like the idea of like bananas costing twice as much in Norway. But I mean, fucking, you live in Norway and you want bananas. What the fuck do you want? You want them to be as cheap as if you lived in Costa Rica? Fuck you. They're going to cost more. You know what I mean? So to a certain extent, I get it. Maybe people need to stop fucking eating bananas in Norway. Fucking Norwegians. The final transportation cost, yeah, okay, we read that. If this cost is accounted for in aggregates, you know, by the labor cost itself or directly into the GSU system, this is what we were just talking about, labor that is being performed to do the spatial distribution of products throughout the world is being effectively obscured. The individual consumer does not see this cost tacked on to the labor time representation they're confronted with when the product appears before them on the shelf, or more precisely, they do see this value, but only in aggregate. So you kind of just don't, at least not specifically. It is not directly tied into their individual position in geographic space. Yeah, I think okay. I'm kind of convincing myself as I go back and reread this. Like I think maybe you would just need to tack it on individually to the product itself. And hey, maybe that would actually make people more fucking conscious consumers. Maybe they'd actually figure out that hey, fuck me, maybe I shouldn't just be asking for strawberries in goddamn February. You know what I'm saying? Maybe I shouldn't be eating, you know, I don't know. People are sick. People like coffee a lot for a reason, so it doesn't seem like we're ever going to be able to fully get away with people not drinking coffee if they live in like fucking Siberia or something. But like, maybe this would allow people to be more conscious consumers. And realistically, like one of the best things about the GIC labor time accounting proposal is that it allows all of this information to be publicly available in a ledger. And when you get a product, you know exactly what has gone into it, at least from a labor perspective. And hell, yeah, I mean, maybe it makes sense to just tack on transportation to that. Um, I don't know. I just don't know. We'll talk about it a bit more, though. It seems like this would be most problematic with food distribution. A globally aggregated labor time accounting for food is obviously not going to reflect the cost of each type of food to each locality. Accurately representing the actual labor required would require some sort of regional variation in labor cost. Again, this is exactly what we're talking about. This leads to kind of like price arbitrage with food. And yeah, again, he used the example here that I just used of producing a pint of strawberries in January is not the same as producing a pint of strawberries in June in every region of the world. Even if globally the aggregate socially required labor time were to somehow remain the same throughout the year, because cyclical production rates can average out or can be forced to average out over the entire geographic expanse of the earth. Yeah, maybe it just makes sense. I mean, maybe that is just like a certain amount of just bowing to like our ecology and being like, okay, we're not going to try and force things too far. This kind of makes sense. I wonder if food though is the only type of thing where you would need to account for transportation costs like that. I mean, you kind of can't really have abstract space for food production, right? Like, because again, strawberries don't grow in Siberia in February. Um, So yeah, I'm just thinking about it because like you can create abstract space for like a steel foundry, right? And you can have abstract space for a lot of construction materials because you can just make that shit anywhere, right? Obviously, stuff to mine it and resources like that aren't distributed evenly around the world, but yeah, there are certain things that you can abstract away from space with, and food isn't one of them. It's interesting. I never really thought about it like that. Interesting stuff. Um, okay, so more stuff about transportation. He says it's not that big of a problem in the long run. And again, this stuff's really important here. So go read this, you goddamn schmucks. Um, Transport is not that big of a problem in the long run. Our current freight transport system is incredibly badly designed when compared to what could be done with simple electric rail, simple electrified rail even. But it's still an important consideration, especially for the long distance transport of products. It becomes much more complicated once you are moving products that can rot. You don't have the same maneuverability where you can just let a car sit in the yard to make up for slop in the scheduling system. Trains aren't just moving from point A to point B, they're moving node to node and being broken apart and reassembled. Most of the time, a car is just sitting, not moving, and the rate it can move through the system is not determined by the speed of the trains, but by the rate of the sorting process. Again, another reason why, if as socialists we want to reorganize society, we need to be thinking about, things fucking boring bullshit like logistics and like how a transportation system would work to give everybody like delicious food and like healthy food and all of that shit. It's very complicated. Movement of products through the system is not a minor consideration. It's a very important aspect of coordination, and that process needs to run smoothly if you want to be able to rapidly adjust process scheduling to local changes in the rates of consumption without excessive time delays. In the modern economy, this sorting problem is often sidestepped by shifting transport to trucks that can facilitate this point-to-point transport, but that come with massive loss of efficiency in terms of energy, labor time, and raw materials consumption. That can be somewhat alleviated through local food production, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. Just another reason that drives me fucking nuts to just, I don't know. I hate cars just in general, but like, yeah, when you see, who was it? Who was the comedian like a while ago? He got in a really bad car accident because his car was it Tracy Morgan? I think it was Tracy Morgan, where he got in a really bad accident and he almost died because a like Walmart big rig transportation truck just fucking T-boned him. Um, And it came out later that like the driver had been awake and driving for fucking 24 hours, and so he was like, "Yeah, I'm sorry, I just didn't fucking see your car, dude." It's just bullshit like that. Like, god damn it, car transport is just so fucking inefficient, and it sucks. You heard it here first. Cars suck. Okay, so we're getting towards the end of it, and this bit is kind of getting more into food consumption, which is very cool. And he kind of talks a little bit about here about how could you actually facilitate things like pubs, pizza shops, chocolate, candy shops, bakeries, donut shops, all of that bullshit that we all know and love, um, in a socialist kind of mode. And he basically describes how you do it. It's relatively simple. But he does say that, like, even though you get a lot of information about where those things are required, and they're just good social spaces, right? Like, we wouldn't want to do away with pubs or pizza shops or any of that bullshit. Like, pubs, because they're just fun places to hang out. Good social spaces for people to hang out. And pizza shops, you give kids a place to go. You know what I'm saying? They can go to Chuck E. Cheese, socialist Chuck E. Cheese. We can redo all of the animatronics so that they sing songs from the Soviet Union or some bullshit. I don't know. You need these kind of social spaces. And also, like, people like donuts and fucking chocolate and all that bullshit. So, like, we're not going to get away with it completely. But then he also gets into talking about institutional kitchens where you can kind of produce food, like a lot of food all at once. You kind of see this in a lot of institutional kitchens in India. There are a lot of like NGO organizations that produce food for the poor. And there are some really cool videos online where they show you like how food is prepared. And it's just like fucking like mountains of biryani, the rice dish. I don't know how to say it. Being produced all at once. And it's just like incredibly healthy. It's incredibly quick to do. You need just like 5 schmucks in a kitchen doing it. You get these big vats. You do it really quickly. So that's the benefit of institutional kitchens. Like we were kind of talking about cafeterias and stuff like that, which I also think would be really good, like social hangout spaces. But again, you kind of need to balance both, right? And you don't want to do away with all of the stuff that we like pizza shops, baby, and fucking, I don't know, bakeries. Yeah, all that good stuff. You don't want to get away. You don't want to. We want, it's easy to kind of forget that as socialists, we're trying to make the world like the best place possible and really like human flourishing times 10, right? But like, it's easy to forget, like, we want to make things nice for people too. You know what I mean? We don't want it to just be like all drab and like you all get the same food in Jack's like horrible dystopian Le Guinian institutional kitchen cafeterias where everybody will hang out and have a good time. You want to have all this bullshit like ice cream shops and all that crap. So, it's definitely good to think about it. I'm going to skip this bit again. This is really, really good. He basically talks about probabilistic estimates and how you can kind of transport food around and plan all of this different stuff. And how all of this stuff, while it is kind of complicated, perfectly capable of being modeled, as complicated and as daunting as food production might seem, you kind of do know about when you're going to have cucumbers. You know when your fucking broad beans are going to come up. It is pretty easy to plan all of this stuff if you're doing it right. I mean, we do it now, right? And we're talking about like actually doing this, but smart. So you'd hope we could fucking do it. Regulating a system like this is, once it's in place, at least the food system portion seems fairly straightforward. I don't know in extreme detail about how that regulatory apparatus should be set up, but I feel like it's at least possible in cybernetic styles of organization, and dynamic modeling would help with that. Again, this is just kind of going into more cybernetic stuff. I'll leave this to you for you sickos to read on your own. But again, this question is something we need to be thinking about when we're thinking about sustainable systems. How good is long enough? Or how good is good enough? How good is good enough? To be considered sustainable is also unclear. 1,000 years, 10,000, forever. I think we just do our best with what we got now. We try to avoid the worst of the climate catastrophe, and we go from there. We make things as sustainable as possible, and then we go from there, because it's a big ask to even try and get a lot of, like, any of this stuff sorted out. So, and then we'll do our best. Everybody just do your best. That's what I say. So do I want to read any of this? I'd really like to see more work done on economic planning systems that try to incorporate cybernetics into the fundamental principles framework. The only system I've seen that uses labor vouchers over a shadow price system is Cockshots. And though it's actually rather good compared to the others, he's trying to do too much with simple linear programming methods, and you can definitely see his Leninist background, dun 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 dun, in his model. I just don't see the appeal of the shadow price approach. It's so unimaginative and fundamentally unworkable. I've never read Cockshot. I got no fucking idea what he's talking about. Somebody actually today recommended that we read Cockshot, one of his books. And yeah, we probably should, but what a fucking despicable human being. It's like, God damn it, do I want to read? I should read his books about planning, or at least one of them, but like, God damn it, there's just so much other stuff that I'd rather read than like this just like despicable fucking turf. But hey, what are you gonna do? Okay, so I think that's pretty much it. Go read this goddamn essay. Yeah, it's like this long. It's incredibly long. But yeah, we're still going. Jeez. To Jack and Dan. Hey, that's us. But you got to go read it. It's fucking phenomenal. Skim it, pick out the shit that you're interested in, and try to expand on it. And remember that as socialists, we need to be engaging in science. And I hate all of the fucking bullshit. You get this from Leninists a lot about like, Marxism is a science. It's the immortal science. We need to, get all of this humanities bullshit out of there. We're just doing hard science here with our Marxism. That's just fucking lame. It's the stupidest shit on the planet. But there's a kernel of truth in it. I mean, don't throw away your humanities stuff. Dan and I did an episode on cultural theory once. That went very well. It was like our fucking 5th episode. It was incredibly funny. It was an excuse to talk about Warhammer. But, what Will has shown in this essay is that the means of production themselves are just as important in a socialist society as the relations, right? As insane as this sounds, we could fundamentally alter our social relations today and have perfect socialist labor time calculation planning, no more value form for me, thank you very much. And everything just fucking implodes anyways, because we need to be rethinking about our industrial systems, about our agricultural systems, and about all of the different ways in which all of these different things are intertwined. And I think that it's a really, really excellent approach to just be taking it from the most simple economy that you could have, right? As he does here. There's a reason he starts with like what I found awesome, but what some of you might find to be boring, a history of market gardening, right? Because you need to be understanding the most basic elements of society, which is food production, right? And how do you do that? Okay, well, here's how you grow things in a way that doesn't erode the soil. Okay, well, how about the tools? Okay, well, you need to be, thinking about industry, and you need to be thinking about chemical inputs and all of that shit. So it just kind of grows from there. But this is the fundamentally most basic unit that you can have an economy be and have it be sustainable. Go read this goddamn essay, now easier than ever. Indeed, Damien. Go read all of this essay, pick out the shit that you're interested in, and do more research. I'm doing all the fucking learning that I can about the actual food production elements of it, because that's what really speaks to me. I really think that stuff's awesome. And just realistically like what I'd like to do. So I don't know if you're a sicko that's really into figuring out how we can produce energy without fossil fuels, or you're really interested in this whole syngas thing because you hate the coke that is used in steel furnaces. Pick out this stuff and just go from there. Again, on the Google Drive link where this essay is, which I'll post again, but you're smart, go fucking find it. We've posted it a million times. There are all sorts of journals and studies and articles on every fucking element of this. So go do your own research, go forth and do science, which is, oh God, that's so lame. But yeah, go read this. It's incredibly, incredibly cool. And thanks again to Will, because fuck me, this has been so cool to come across. It was so funny when we first got the email. It was just like, Will was just like, hey, I've been researching the confluence of sustainable agricultural practices, labor time calculation, and Marxism for the last 20 years. And Dan and I were like, is this guy fucking spook? Like, what the hell? It's just exactly what we're interested in. So, again, go read it. And thanks for everybody for tuning in. This is really, really fun. If you got any questions, feel free to ask. We'll be all over those. And again, what we're reading for Friday is this bullshit, John Riddell essays on Lenin's Comintern. We're trying to figure out what this whole democratic socialism thing is. So thanks again for watching, everybody. See you later.